Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I welcome the opportunity to update the House on this expenditure and the extensive efforts of the Morrison government responding to COVID-19 in our region, working with our Pacific family and our Indo-Pacific neighbours to achieve that shared recovery. The 2021 budget provides $4 billion in official development assistance this year, with our development efforts focused on supporting a resilient, stable and prosperous Indo-Pacific. I'm proud that this includes a record $1.44 billion of ODA to be spent in the Pacific. That is a record by an Australian government. $1 billion also for Southeast Asia, recognising our commitment to these two important regions. The pandemic has had a serious economic impact on our region, and that's why the government has announced our supplementary two-year $304.7 million COVID-19 recovery package, which will deliver critical temporary targeted economic and fiscal support to our Pacific partners and Timor-Leste, which will help them maintain critical services and protect the vulnerable people within these countries in the region that are suffering under the pandemic. We've pivoted in this time our development partnerships. We've redirected our development efforts to respond to the impacts of the pandemic on our regional partners, while with a focus on maintaining health security, stability and stimulating economic recovery and activity. As part of our Partnerships for Recovery strategy, Minister Payne and I, in close consultation with our regional partners, released 27 country-specific COVID-19 development response plans. These provide a blueprint for support at country, regional and global levels. And it goes beyond ODA, drawing on all of the policy tools, including development, diplomatic, trade, immigration and security cooperation, for the first time capturing all of the whole-of-government effort. There's no better example than our Pacific Labour Mobility programs of the work that we're doing in this region. The government has moved quickly to enable Pacific workers who were here in Australia when the pandemic struck to stay here and keep working and be able to be redeployed and ensure they are moving successfully around Australia. And I'm glad that during that time we haven't had a single case of COVID amongst that cohort, a very important benchmark. We've now recommenced new recruitments under the Seasonal Worker Program in the Pacific Labour Scheme to keep vital remittances flowing to the Pacific, while also filling critical workforce gaps in rural and regional Australia. And since the onset of the pandemic, the Prime Minister and Minister Payne and I have been speaking regularly with our regional colleagues about how Australia can best contribute to the regional response as the impacts emerge. Australia is committed to procuring and delivering COVID-19 vaccines for the Pacific, Deputy Speaker, Timor-Leste and Southeast Asia. We've committed an additional $500 million on top of the $23.2 million committed in the budget. That's $500 million for the vaccinations in the Pacific and Southeast Asia. This builds on the additional commitment of $80 million to the Gavi COVAX Advanced Market Commitment, which will support access for eligible countries. And I can say this has been well received in the region and by our partners, this important commitment by Australia to ensure that our region receives vaccinations. We've reshaped our development program substantially, and Australia's immediate response included the $280 million Indo-Pacific Response and Recovery Package, which we announced in May, moving fast to adapt to the situation. And between March and June, we reworked about 400 of around 1,000 investments worth over $840 million to help regional partners manage immediate challenges posed by the pandemic. We've retained and mobilised over 100 critical aid and humanitarian advisors in our region. And our government has responded to more than 120 Pacific bilateral requests for assistance, delivering over 35 tonnes of humanitarian supplies, PPE, medical equipment and, of course, importantly, 54,000 GeneXpert testing cartridges for COVID-19 to 13 Pacific Island countries and Timor-Leste. As you know, Deputy Speaker, we've deployed AUSMAT teams, we've ensured essential medical food and testing supplies, and we've certainly provided support through the traditional tropical cyclone season as well, Tropical Cyclone Harold, notably devastating Vanuatu, Fiji and Tonga. Australian support has enabled the Government of Timor-Leste to establish independent testing capability, and increasingly we're integrating our climate change and disaster resilience into our development programs, and our COVID-19 response efforts pledge $500 million over 5 years to help Pacific nations invest in renewable energy and build climate and disaster resilience. Deputy Speaker, how our region emerges from this crisis will influence our economic and strategic circumstances for decades to come, and at this crucial time we're standing together as close and valued partners. We're here for the Pacific Timor-Leste. We're going to get through this as a family, and Australia will support our neighbours all the way.